Hi, I'm Mrs H. You can find me at Sewing Patterns by Mrs H. That's at www.mrs-h.com. Today we're going to be sewing the Hope Handbag, which is the Bag of the Month Club pattern for February 21. If you've got all your supplies ready and you've got your pattern downloaded, we're ready to start. So we'll get started with the pocket tack, so on the front panel, and that's to create this pieced panel. Now you can create it without the pocket if you prefer and just have the pieced front, or you can create it with the pocket, in which case this piece here becomes the pocket so that you can slip your phone or, I don't know, your travel pass, your keys into there. Now this will finish up as the same size as the back panel, so you can create both sides with this pieced panel with pockets if you prefer, if you like lots of pockets, or you can do just the plain panels. So you'll need your pattern pieces for the pocket hack, which is a separate set of files, which you should have, or pattern pieces, sorry. And we've got the 3 pieces here. Now you'll have 3 of this piece here if you're going to make the pocket. Okay, so I've got another 2 over to one side. If you're just going to piece it and not have the pocket, you'll only have these 3. And on the back of here, I've transferred the markings. So I've got a triangle on that side and a star on that side, and that helps me to know which side to sew these to. And I've got my star there, my triangle there, and then triangle on these pieces here. So we're going to pop this piece to the side for the minute. And the first thing we're going to do is attach this to this, and we're going to sew along this line. Okay. I'm going to pin these in place just to make sure I'm sewing in a straight line. And just whiz along that with our usual 3/8 inch seam allowance. Back stitched at the start and the end of that, just to make sure that it's all secure. Although really you are going to be sewing over these seams again, so you don't have to. It's personal preference. Okay. So you'll notice that when we sewed that, you've got a little sort of triangle extra at the end. So when you line it up, it's not focusing, sorry. Okay, so when you line it up, you're lining up this edge so that that matches, and the other end you've got this extra little triangle poking out the bottom. That's okay. Once you sew that and turn it back, it will line up perfectly. I like to open my seam allowances, so on the wrong side I'm just going to finger press those open, and then we'll go over to the ironing board and give that a little press. I think a nice bit of steam gives you a really good finish on your finished bag, so it's worth taking a little bit of extra time here. So press those open. Now if you've got particularly light fabric, you might want to press those seam allowances towards one side. In fact, that does show up, so I'm going to go back and just press those both to the darker side so they're hidden. Yeah, can't see them then, that's fine. Okay, so there's the start of our pocket piece, and now we're going to put this to one side and create the pocket that goes here. So you should have another 2 pieces exactly the same. Let me turn it around so it's the right way to you. And this is the edge that we've just sewn attached to that piece. So let me transfer the markings over to that as well. Oh, hang on. Lay that on and transfer the markings. So that edge is going to be the triangle edge, and this edge that we're sewing is the star edge. So we're going to, so I've put these right sides together, and we're going to sew along this star edge with our usual 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Trying to be a bit better at not sewing through pins, so if you see me sew through pins, please shout at me. Okay, right, so now that we've sewn that seam, we can press these seam allowances, and we're going to fold it so it's wrong sides matching. So I'll transfer us back to the ironing board. And I'm going to press these to one side, so from the wrong side, and press from one side to the other to start with, and then turn it around and do the same on the other side. And then I can fold these wrong sides together, and that seam at the top should hopefully pop out nice and neat. Just give it a little finger roll if it's not. There we go. So now we can get our panel back again. And I'm going to lay this and turn it around so this is the right way to you. So this is going to be the top of my bag, and I need to lay this on top. I'll just trim the ends here and that little corner off. Lay this on top, matching up the raw edges. And then I can pin that into place, and I'm going to baste down this edge, along the bottom and up this edge. Oh, hang on though. Should just say, if you want some top stitching on your pocket, now is the time to do it before you put it into place. I'm not going to, because I think it's quite a small pocket and you don't need top stitching to hold the linings and everything into place, and I want it to look quite seamless. So I'm not going to, but if you would like to, now is the time to do it. Just pop a few pins in to keep everything in place. Got some quite funny angles here, isn't it? Turn it round. Just trim that little corner off there. Now if it doesn't exactly line up, don't panic. Turn it over and trim any excess away, or you can do that after basting, your choice. And I'm just going to baste all the way along now, along that curve and down. So I'm going to use a long stitch length. I'm going to use number 6, that's the longest I've got on my machine. And I'm literally just holding this into place. So I'm going to use a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, which is smaller than a seam allowance for the bag, which means that this will be hidden then. Once we have sewn the seams of the bag. Move that so you can see a bit better. Okay. I'm going quite slowly around these curves. Don't panic if it doesn't look quite fully lined up. Once you sew the last piece on, we can then adjust it. Oh look, I've just sewn through all of those pins. 2 seconds after sewing, I was trying to not sew through my pins. Okay, so there's our first two pieces sewn together. Now we need to attach this piece. So on the back we've got triangle and triangle, and we are attaching that to the triangle seam here. I'll turn around to face me so that I can see what I'm doing. Right, so line up the top to the top, and you'll have a little triangle extra at the bottom there. I'm just pinning all the way along to hold it in place, keep everything together while I'm sewing. Now double check that looks okay. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. Now I'll sew using my regular stitch length. I'm going to change it back, and I'm going to back stitch at the start and the end, and I'm going to sew using my regular 3/8 inch seam allowance. Now when you get to this pocket seam, or this seam where it's joining, you might want to back stitch, just to make sure that that stress point of where the pocket is just got a bit of extra reinforcement. Okay, right, so let's see how that looks, and then we'll give it a good press, and we're ready to treat it as one panel. Lovely. Oh, I've got that slightly wonky there. Let's pretend that's nice and straight, okay. So I'll give this a press with the seam allowances towards the dark side, and you can see I've got my pocket there hidden in the panel. So let's go back over to the ironing board. Give those seam allowances a little press. Okay, and if you have gone slightly wonky on the bottom as well, we'll trim that up now. Sure you haven't though, because your cutting out is obviously going to be a lot straighter than mine. And that must be my superpower, being able to cut quite wonky. So I'm just giving this a good steam to make sure that everything's where it should be. And that's my front panel with a pocket and a wonky bit, which we're not going to talk about. So now you need your foam, and we're moving on to the regular part of the pattern. Okay, so if you have not pieced your panel, you'll have your lovely cutout panel here, and this is when you join us. Okay, so what I like to do is I like to pin in one corner and then smooth all the way up to the opposite corner and pop a pin in there as well. And then in this bottom corner down here, so again smooth it down and then smooth all the way up into the other corner. And you can also put pins in the centre, which I think I will. Just hold it in place, and maybe even in these top points, just to make sure they all stay where they should when we're sewing. Could put some pins in this edge here, but I don't think I am for a minute. So I'll change my stitch length back up to my basting stitch. I'm going to sew around all of the edges at 1/4 inch seam allowance. once you get to the corners, leave your needle down, lift your foot and pivot around. There we go. That's all based into place. Took my time around the curves, just to be sure. That wasn't going to go into the visible area. So now I need my scissors. I'm going to trim this extra stabiliser away. So what I like to do is turn it upside down, and then starting from one edge, just snip and pull the stabiliser back out of the way. And just trim all the way along. As close as you can to the stitch line, the basting stitch, and this will just reduce the bulk in your seam allowances. Okay, and we do this all the way around. It's a bit tricky around the curves. My scissors are got these micro serrated edges, so it does catch on the foam sometimes. Okay, there we go. So that's the back of our panel, and we've cut as much of the foam away from the seam allowance as we can. And there's the front with my secret hidden pocket in the design. So now we're ready to sew. So we'll need this panel and our regular back panel, or if you're doing all one colour, you'll have two of those. And we also need our base, and I've added foam, my interfacing and foam to the base and to my exterior panel. So this is piece A, this is piece B, and this now I think that is made up of HIJ. Let me just double check. Yeah, so HI and J, and once that's sewn together, then that becomes our panel B, and we are ready to sew. So now that we've finished those pieces, we can put them to one side, and we need next our lining pieces. So we're going to create the lining zip pocket and the lining slip pocket. So I've got my zip for the lining zip pocket. My zip is slightly longer, so I'll just sew it and then cut it down to size later. I wouldn't recommend you cut it down to size yet. Make your zip pocket first and then trim it down afterwards. I've got my zip pocket facing and my zip pocket bottom, and these are both out of the same fabric as my lining. And then I've got my zip pocket top, which is out of the same fabric as my exterior, and that will just be a nice little pop of feature fabric once you open your zip pocket, so that'll be inside. I've got my pocket pieces. I've also got my 2 lining panels here. And I've got my slip pocket there. So we can put the slip pocket and one lining panel to one side. And then we've got our second lining panel here. I'm going to try and do this upside down to me so that you can see it the right way to you. Now I need my zip pocket facing, and on the wrong side we're going to draw a box, and the box is going to be 9 inches long. So along the long edges I'm going to measure 1/2 inch in. So I've put my ruler, the 1/2 inch line on my ruler on the edge of the facing, and I can draw my line. And then, in fact, let me move these out of the way so that you can see a little bit easier. Okay, so I've done 1/2 inch from that line, and I'm going to do 1/2 inch from this edge as well. And this should leave a gap in between the 2 lines of around about 3/8 of an inch. If you're using a number 5 zip, then just decrease the distance from the edges so that this box in the middle measures a 1/2 inch. Okay, and that will leave room for the extra size of the teeth. Now from the short edges, I'm going to mark at 1 inch, and again on this end. So that's our box that we've marked, and that should be 9 inches long and 3/8 of an inch high. 9 inches is, I have no idea, 23 centimetres long, and 3/8 of an inch is 1 centimetre high. Now I'm going to go ahead and mark in the middle my cutting line later. So along the centre of that box, draw a line and then a little triangle on each end, and that just shows us where we need to trim later on. I need my lining panel, and don't forget to mark your centres. It does tell you to do this in after step 2, and I always forget. But I write it in there just in the hope that I will one day remember. Okay, so I've marked the centres in the seam allowance, top and bottom. And I'll do the same for this piece as well. So we're going to match that centre to centre, so that the centre marks line up. And we're going to place this facing 1 inch from the top edge. So I'll get my ruler and place it on the 1 inch line. And then I can place this one up against it. And I'm using this white line on my ruler to mark the centre because I find it's a little bit easier than the thick black ones. So once that's in place, we can pin either end of the facing. I'll just put my pins in halfway for the minute and then pull that ruler away and push it through. I'll pop one in the middle as well, it's a little bit longer, this one. So now we're going to sew around the outside edge of the box, and we're going to sew around all 4 edges. So you might like to start somewhere a little way away from the edge. When we do our final top stitch, I like to start in this bottom corner here because I find that that's not very noticeable. People don't tend to notice if you go a little bit wonky there. So I'll probably start sewing my box on this step here, or maybe here. I'll put a little note in so I remember. And then when we turn it through and put our zip in and top stitch, I'll top stitch from there, and then that just offsets the back stitching. So I'm using my regular stitch length. And I'm going to sew on the line all the way around the box. And at each corner, I'm going to start with my needle down, lift the presser foot and pivot. And if you find you're not quite at the corner, decrease your stitch length until it's something like, I don't know, 1. And then just individually stitch until you get to the corner. Okay, perfect. There's our facing sewn into place. And the next thing we need to do is cut along the centre line. And I'm going to use a, I don't know what it's called, like a little craft knife, I guess. Just to get it started, and then I can pop my scissors in. Now, if you've ever done dressmaking, you'll know when you're cutting buttonholes, you put a pin at the top and the bottom of each buttonhole to stop you going through it. Do the same here on your zip pocket. You've just got that little bit extra confidence that you're not going to go through that stitching. So put those through directly on that stitching line. And I can put my scissors in. Now smaller scissors are much better to do this, but I've misplaced mine and can't find them, so I'm using my bigger ones. If you've got smaller scissors, I do recommend you use smaller scissors. So I'm snipping up the centre line to the triangle. Now I'll go for my little snips and cut into these triangle lines here. And you're going to snip as close as you can get to that pin that's protecting your stitching without cutting through that stitching. Double check I'm as close as I can be. Yep, lovely. Okay, so we'll do the same on the other end. These little snips are not quite as sharp as my proper scissors, so I have to do a few little snips to get the same effect. I've got lovely sharp scissors, you shouldn't need to do that. Let's take that pin out and double check. Great. Okay, so now we need to press this and turn it through. So let's move my ruler out of the way and we'll move you back to the ironing board. Okay. Now I like to just give all of the stitches a little steam press before I start manipulating anything, because it just helps those stitches really bed down into that fabric. And then I'm going to pull up the side and the bottom and the top, and I'm pushing against that stitch line with my iron. And I've got steam on, and it just helps those edges come up nice and crisp. Okay. Now I think possibly the instructions tell you to iron before you snip through, so it doesn't really matter, it just holds it in place a little bit better. Now you can push that facing through and tug it from behind. Because of that steam pressing, that should pop into place really nicely on the edges. And then do a little finger roll along the edges. And what I like to do is just do a bit shorten space here at the ironing board. Just do a little bit there and press that into place, and then move on and do the second half of that edge. Okay, a little bit of steam goes a long way in this this section. So I encourage you to please use steam if you can. Okay, so just finger roll and manipulate that facing through to the back. You can give it a little tug from behind if you need to. And then a little press. And the same on the last edge there. Give it a little finger roll, give it a tug from the back, and give it a press into place. It's a little bit more fiddly and a little bit more fussy doing the pocket like this way, but it does hide those zip tape edges inside the pocket. It gives you a much neater finish. So I think in this instance it's worth the extra effort for the better finish. So because we've done that extra steaming, you can see there's no puckers at all on the lining piece. There are a few puckers inside on the facing. Now I found that you're going to get puckers regardless. So if you know you're going to get puckers, why not hide them inside? So that's why I like to press from the front, do the extra steaming, push it through, press from the front, and then you know that any puckers that you are going to get are going to be hidden on the inside that facing. So we can pop that to one side for the minute. We need our zip, and we need our lining top and our lining bottom. So, no, this is my top, this is my bottom. Your bottom is smaller than your top, which would true for me, I would love it. Oh, if only bodies were like bags. Right, so I'm going to pop the lining pocket top to one side. Okay, and we need our bottom, and then we're going to add a line of double-sided basting tape to the upper edge, and we're going to add it on the right side. So long since I've sewn, I think my tape has dried out. But okay, so that's the upper edge. Let me turn it around so it looks like it's the upper edge for you. Okay. Now we're going to take that tape off, and now we're going to line the zip up. Just double check my zip is okay, yeah. And we're going to line it up with the pull to the right. But because I'm doing this upside down, I'm going to line it up with the pull to the left for me. And I'm going to centre my zip and match the edge of the zip to the raw edge of the pocket. Okay, so this feels wrong. I know it feels wrong. You have got your right side of your fabric, right side up, and you've got your zip right side up on top. And you're going to sew this into place using a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. Using your regular stitch length. Double check I've got that, yeah. And for this I'm not going to change my foot to the zip foot. I like the comfort blanket, my walking foot. So once we've sewn that, we're going to flip that over to the other side and give it a little press. Now when you give it a little press, you will see a bit of the tape is peeking out of the edge there. So just make sure that your tape is not folded over. So don't pull the edge to expose the tape. You can have a little bit of a fold there. You can afford that little bit of a fold there, just to make sure that the tape is covered up. You've got plenty of space. So we'll give that a little press. And you're not going to be top stitching this just yet. Literally just pressing it into place to hold it. Again, a bit of steam does wonders here. Okay. So that's nicely pressed into place. So you can see we've got the right side of our fabric with the wrong side of the zip now. bear with me, it does work out. Okay, so now we need our zip pocket top. Okay, now if you've got directional fabrics, then the instructions in the pattern will help you work out which way to have it. Okay, so if you've got directional fabric and this is the bottom and this is the top, you're going to be adding your tape to the top edge. Now mine is a multi-direction fabric, but I will still do that so that you can follow along when you make your own Hope handbag. Okay, so I've added some tape to the upper edge on the right side of the zip pocket top. Now I'm going to turn it 180 degrees so that the upper edge is on the bottom. So as you are looking at this, this is the upper edge and it's on the bottom. Okay, take that tape off. Now we're going to place this on top, matching raw edges and centres. Okay, these instructions are quite detailed, so do follow them with regards to the placement. Okay, and now we're going to sew that again with our scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. As you come to the zip pull, just leave the needle down, move the pull out of the way, drop your presser foot back down again. Okay, so now we need to do to press this one out of the way again as well. So make sure your seam allowances are all nice and flat underneath. Give that a good little press. Bit of steam again. Double check on this side, looks fine as well, yeah. Good, okay. Oh, hang on. Thought I'd sewn through my zip then. Okay. There we go. So this is going to go on the back of our lining panel. So that's my top. Let me turn it around so you can see it. That's my top and that's my bottom. And this will fold down to be your pocket inside the bag. Okay. Put it back up again. So now we need our lining panel with the zip facing attached. And I'm going to add a line of double-sided tape along the top and the bottom edges of this facing, of this opening, sorry. If you don't already have double-sided facing tape, I recommend you invest in some, and if you can get it in bulk, it's even cheaper. Okay. Get the wash away one, quilters wash away 1/4 inch tape, or Wonder tape sometimes call it. Okay, so now we've got our pocket panel opened up, and I'll turn it around so it's the right way to you. So this is my pocket top and this is my pocket bottom. So now, let me open the zip a little bit because my zip is slightly longer. I'm going to lay my lining panel on top, right side up. And I'm lining up the edge of my facing with the edge of my pocket pieces. And once your zip is nicely aligned through that gap, you can press down to get your tape to adhere and just hold it into place until you can sew. Now don't do this until you're ready to sew, because it does tend to lose its stickiness after a little while. Okay, so that's the right side of my lining and the zip is facing the right way. And poking out through that hole, and on the back got the right sides of the pocket pieces and the wrong side of the zip. Okay, now we're going to sew around this box, and I'm going to start there and go all the way around. Now I'm using a contrast colour, which is always a bit risky, so if I go a bit wonky, please pretend I haven't. Now actually I'm not going to back stitch because I'm using a contrast colour. I'll leave my threads slightly longer and tie them off at the end. So to do that on my machine, because I use my thread cutter, I'll just pull my bobbin thread out a little bit. It only leaves a little tail otherwise. I'll pull my bobbin through. Okay, so I've got long tails there for this one, and then I can pull them through and tie them off afterwards. A little bit extra effort, but it gives a better finish, I think. I'll start here. And again, the same as we sewed the box before, so sew to the corner, stop with your needle down and pivot, and then keep, put your press foot back down again. Keep going. Okay, now I'm not going to use my thread cutter because I'm going to leave my tails long to tie off, so I'll pull that out. And then on the wrong side, you can pull on your bobbin threads just very, very gently, and you'll get a small loop up here. And that's the loop of the thread from the front. So you can pop a pin in to just pull that little loop. So put your pin through the loop. Okay, so there's all 4 of my threads, and now I'm going to join 2 and 2 and tie a little knot. And this is on the wrong side, so it's really not going to be very noticed at all. And it's a lot more subtle than a back stitch in this situation. Oh, bit of tape attached. Just trim those threads off as close as I can then. Okay. Open your zip. It says in my pattern, open your zip, so I should probably open my zip. Okay. Well, hang on, I'm ahead of myself. Don't need to open the zip yet, but I suppose if you open the zip now, you know that it's definitely open. And then when it says in big shouty letters, open the zip and leave it open, you can say, I've done it. Okay, so on the wrong side now, we're just going to bring these 2 to match each other. So I'm bringing the bottom edge of the pocket top to meet the bottom edge of the pocket bottom. And I'm just going to pin those into place to hold them together, not through the lining piece, just through the pocket pieces. And I'm going to leave my turning gap in the bottom of the pocket here. So I'm putting a double pin in either side. I'm going to try and make that as big as I can. The bigger your turning gap, the easier turning it is. Okay, so just make sure that you pull these pieces away from your lining panel to pin and sew them. You don't want to get our lining panel caught. And then I'm going to sew along these 2 side edges. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to back stitch at the start here, and I'm going to sew all the way to the bottom and pivot, and then back stitch here where my double pin is. Then I'm going to change my stitch length up to a basting stitch, which is the longest stitch my machine's got. And I'm going to sew from double pin to double pin using that big basting stitch. Then I'm going to decrease my stitch length back down to my regular stitch length and do a double stitch, a back stitch there where that double pin is. And then I'm going to sew to the corner, pivot, and all the way up to the end, and I'm going to back stitch here as well. So that means that these sides and corners are going to be sewn with your regular stitch length, and this bottom is going to be sewn just with your basting stitch. That means that when you steam press these stitches, you can rip them out and it will leave a little pinhole or a needle hole all along the seam allowance there, so that you can turn these under really nice and neat, and it will fold naturally along that stitch line that you've stitched on. Okay, so that's what we're going to do now. Make sure I have my regular seam allowance, and I'm going to sew with the lining panel on top, and I'm going to pull it back. Oh, hang on. Let me just double check where my metal stopper is. You don't want to sew on your metal stopper. Okay, so the back stitch here where the double pin is just reinforcing it, so that when you're turning it through and it's got that stress and that pressure of turning it through on it, it doesn't fail and doesn't pull out. So I've changed my stitch length up to my longest stitch. And then back down to my shorter length. And up the sides. Okay, so that's our zip pocket on the back. And what I usually do is I steam press these stitches now, and then I leave them in. So these basting stitches, I usually leave them in until right near the end, and it just helps the lining hold its shape a bit better. So I'm just steam pressing those now. Okay, let's come back. There we go. Right, now open your zip and leave it open. Yes, Mrs. H. Okay. Here we go, so that's one of our panels done. We'll need now our second lining panel and our slip pocket. And this one is very straightforward. Whoops. Okay, hang on, I'm doing this backwards, aren't I? There we go. So now we need to fold this in half to form a rectangle 11 inches wide by 5 inches high. Double check that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, got it. Okay. And I'll pin in the corners. Might pin a bit further in an attempt to stick to my resolution to not sew through pins that I've broken about a zillion times. And in the corners there. And I'm going to do exactly the same with the bottom of this pocket as I did for the zip pocket. So I'm going to do a row of basting stitches along here to give me a nice neat turning gap. I'm not going to do the double pin this time because I've told you and we've seen it, so in theory I should remember it. Oh look, I did remember, well done. double clip my corners. So I'll show you what that means. So I like to do one clip directly across, as you usually would, and then I like to go even further into the seam allowance either side. Okay, so I haven't cut through the stitching there on the corner, and then at the top, just cut that off as well. I haven't cut through the stitching, just cut into the seam allowance. And I'll do my double cut again on this corner. Okay. Get these trimmings out of the way. I do have a little tiny thread in. Sure, I've got one somewhere. Okay, so now we're going to steam press these stitches, and then we're going to turn the pocket through. So I'm steam pressing those basting stitches, and I also like to steam press these other stitches just to make sure they're all really nice and neat. Okay, and now we need the seam ripper or the unpicker. I'm going to unpick these basting stitches just along the bottom. And you can go into the seam and rip these if you like. There's probably quicker ways to do this, and I'm sorry if you're all sitting there saying, come on, get on with it. I've lost my big unpicker, so I'm having to use this little diddly one. Probably hiding in the same place as my small scissors. Okay. There we go. Okay, so I've removed those basting stitches. Now we can turn this pocket piece right sides out. And I like to use, as my turning tool, I've got a small crochet hook, and I just like to pop that in the corner there to help that corner pop out, and again this corner, and then I like to run it along that seam, and that helps to make sure that the seam line is fully turned out. And again this top corner. Bottom corner. And that one. Okay. So now we've got our little row of stitch holes. So I'm just folding along those and using my thumbnail to press those into place. And then I can turn it over and do exactly the same on the other side. Okay, and once you're happy that those are lined up, you can give that a lovely little steam press. And what I usually do is make sure they're nicely lined up and steam press the bottom before I press the rest of the pocket. Pressed into place, and I can add a couple of pins in there to keep those together because that's neat. Okay, and now I can just make sure that this edge is fully rolled out. Yep, it's still rolled out. And then the second edge. And then we can do the top edge. Because we know that doing that won't affect this bottom because we've pinned that into place. And sometimes if you press the top edge first and then press the bottom, it can pull it out of shape and you don't end up with quite such a neat finish. Okay, so let's mark our centres on here again. Oops. Top and bottom in the centre within the seam allowance. Now I'm going to pop this finished pocket, get my extra threads off, onto this lining panel. I'm going to put it 3 inches from the bottom, 7.5 centimetres. So I'll put my ruler at 3 inches from the bottom, and I'm using this white line here just to indicate my centre because it's a little bit easier for me to see. Make sure I've got all these loose threads out of that turning gap for the pockets before I put it on. And I'm going to line up the centres, so the centre of the pocket to the centre of the lining panel. Just make sure that's nicely lined up. Yep, that looks fine. So I can pop a pin in each top corner before I move that ruler away. There we go. And then I can pop in the bottom corner. Okay. Now I'm going to sew from this top corner here, and I'm going to back stitch at the start and the end. I'm going to sew to this bottom corner, pivot, and sew along to there, pivot, and back up to here and back stitch. Now if you want to divide this pocket up, then you can. I've put a couple of suggestions in there, so I'll sew this into place and then we'll come back and do the suggestions. Now I'm going to pop a little label. I've got some satin ribbon labels with my website address on, so I'm going to pop that in. I do worry that when I send these samples out or take them to shows that I might accidentally lose one, and I like to think that it might make its way back to me then. I'm just going to pop that in. I've got these from Naked Labels in the UK, and I think I bought 100 about 4 years ago, and I've still got about 70 of them left. Okay, so let's do some sewing. So we're going to start at the top and use my regular stitch length. Take these pins out and we'll divide it as per the pattern for this one. You can divide it really how you see fit. So if you want to put your phone in there, for example, you can just pop your phone into that pocket and sort of make a mark where you need to sew the line. In fact, mine would be fine if I just did it up the centre of my phone. You can mark it how you're going to use it. Okay, so 1.5 inches from the left edge. So that would be this. Just line up the edge. So I'm lining up 1.5 inches inside there. I'm going to use my Chaco liner for this. This is a pen that's got chalk dust in it and a little metal roller wheel. And as you roll along, it just deposits a fine line of chalk dust onto the fabric. And then again at 6 inches, line that up again. So this will fit a pen, a phone, and then you've got a little pocket for some tissues or something. But if you use different, then if you carry different things or want to store different things, please do alter this to suit yourself. That's a wonderful thing about making bags, isn't it? So to sew these, I'm going to start at the bottom and back stitch, then I'm going to sew up to the top and back stitch, then I'm going to lift my presser foot and pivot and sew back down again and back stitch again at the bottom. That just gives you an extra line of stitching. Second one. Okay, so we can just trim the extra little threads from here, and this chalk dust will just rub off, or you can add a dab of water if you've been a bit enthusiastic, but for me that's just rubbed off easily. Okay, so there's my pocket piece. Oh look, I forgot to top stitch my pocket. Well done if you spotted that. So after sewing it together and pressing it and turning it right sides out, you should have top stitch your pocket. You don't need that structurally, it just looks a bit neater, but apparently mine's going to be without for that one. So I've got a pen pocket, I've got a phone pocket, and I've got a little tissues pocket or whatever else you want to carry. And then on the other lining panel I've got my zip pocket, and that's the two lining panels ready then, the lining bottoms, sorry, ready to have the zip top closure added in. So now that we've completed these lining bottoms, we can pop these to one side for now, and what we need next is the interior tops. So that's these shaped pieces, and these are going to be cut out of your exterior fabric, so that when you look inside the bag and your zip is closed up, you'll just see the same fabric as your exterior. Okay, so that's what you'll see when you look inside the bag. So to start with, I've steamed my zip. Now this helps because when you're sewing and you're going to steam press the stitches afterwards, you don't want your zip to shrink after you've sewn it. So if there's any shrinking to occur, steam it before you get started. So we'll pop those to one side. I've got my ruler here. Now I'm using a continuous zip, so I've cut mine slightly longer as per the pattern. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sew a little stopper across here, just to be sure that I don't accidentally pull the pull off. So to do that, I've got a straight stitch only machine, and I've just sewn some stitches backwards and forwards over the end, just to be sure I don't pull the end off. Okay, now I've made sure that my open end, the tape is exactly matching, and that means that when you come to do this next bit, they should match up perfectly when sewn in. Okay, so what I'm going to do is fold my zip so that the tape runs off at a 45-degree angle. And in doing that, what I've done is I've made sure that all of these edges line up, and then I can just pop a couple of hand stitches in to hold that in place. Okay, and on the back you can see there's a 45-degree angle there. Trying to get it to focus, doesn't seem to be wanting to focus on this one. Hopefully you can see that without too much difficulty. So just manipulate this zip tape into place so that it keeps that tape at exactly 45-degree angle. Add a couple of stitches just to secure it. And if you do the same on both ends, so make sure that the tape lines up perfectly on the edge where you folded it, then you know that when you come to sew that into your bag, it will be even on both edges. Okay, so just tie a little knot in that end as well. So for this second side, I'll try and do it a bit closer and I hope that it will focus and you can see. So you just bring this top edge down and just manipulate it until you get it so that the top edges come down and these side edges match perfectly. I wonder if I swap to the other camera I might be able to see it a little bit better. Okay, so I'm just bringing this top edge down so the top edge is level with the side edge of the zip tape. Okay, and then we can stitch that into place. And that just means that the end of your zip is nicely finished. It stops the pull coming off. If anybody gets a bit too enthusiastic, it shouldn't come off hopefully. Literally just put a few hand stitches in here to hold it in place. You could do that by machine actually, think about it. For some reason I've always done it by hand and I hate hand stitching, I'm terrible at it, but I've always done it. Okay. So now my zip has got a nicely finished end and that's nice and even. So when we put it into our panels it will match up really well. Okay, so that's the zip prepared. Now on the pattern on the next page, it tells you what markings you need. So for the end that will have the open end of the zip, we want to go ahead and mark 1.5 inches in from the left hand side. So I'll turn this around and do it from your perspective. And I'm going to use my Chaco liner again. Just make sure that's nicely lined up. 1.5 inches. And I'm going to use my Chaco so that it rubs out. But if you are marking within the seam allowance, it doesn't really matter too much what kind of pen you use. So that's the 1.5 inches. And then, no, hang on. Yes. Okay. Pretend that didn't happen. So 1.5 inches from the left hand edge and 2 inches from the right. Make sure it's all lined up. There we go. Now I'm also going to pop a little mark in here. 1 inch away from the bottom. Slightly awkward doing this back to front. There you go. Okay. Right. Okay, so the instructions are actually the other way around. So 2 inches from the right edge, 1.5 inch from the left edge. So that's 5 centimetres and 3.8 centimetres. And then here on this this end, this will have the closed end of the zip. We're marking 1 inch from the bottom. Now we're going to add tape, basting tape, between those two marks. Okay, and we're just going to run it along the entire bottom edge between those two marks. Okay. Now we're going to place our zip right sides down and we're going to put the open end on level with this mark. So however you do it, be consistent. So if you put it so that your the edge of your teeth are level with that mark, remember that for the next side. If you've put it so that the edge of your tape is level with that mark, remember so you can do it for the next side. You just want them to be completely even. Okay, so press that into place right up until that mark. Now pop a little clip in there just to be sure to hold it into place. And I'm going to do that again for this side as well, maybe in the middle, just to be sure. And then pull this closed end up so that it meets that 1 inch mark there. And I'm going to use a long clip for this one. Which will hold that in place out of the way while we sew. Okay. Now you can see that where we've folded it, that hangs over the bottom edge a little bit. Don't worry about that too much, we can trim that up. Okay. Right, so now we've basted along the bottom there, and I'm going to use my regular walking foot for this one. I will swap to my zip foot when we come to actually sew the zip in though. So I'm going to start at this closed end. Let's just make sure that my zip is still level with the bottom. And you can sew this with a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance if it doesn't already tell you that. I'm sure it does. Yes, it's scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm using my regular stitch length. No, I'm not. I'm using my basting stitch length. Okay, you can open the zip. That zip basted into place. Now you could actually unzip this all the way because we've added that bit of basting in the end there, haven't we, to keep it in place, and that will help make this a little bit easier for you if you're not particularly confident with zips. Okay, that's our zip basted to the interior top. Next we want one of our lining panels. Now have a look at this and think, how do you want to carry your bag? So if you want to open your bag and then reach in and have your zip pocket on the back, then you're going to want your zip pocket panel for this next bit. Okay, so the open end is on your left and you want the lining zip pocket panel. Okay, if you want it the other way around with the slip pocket, then you want your slip pocket for the next bit. Okay, now have we marked centres? Probably not, so let's go ahead and mark our centre of this interior top, just to make sure that we're all nicely lined up. And I've already marked the centre there, so I'm going to add a line of basting tape along the entire top of this panel. And then we're going to baste this interior top onto it, sandwiching this zip in between. So if you've got any other patterns which have got this separate fabric on the top and the bottom, you can easily adapt them to have a zip. You can just follow this method and adapt them to add a little zip closure, which is just a little bit extra secure, isn't it, sometimes if you're commuting or travelling or prone to dropping your bag full of everything like I am. It just gives you that extra security. So matching up the centres there and pressing that down onto the lining bottom panel, matching the raw edges as best you can. There we go. Okay, now we're going to change back to our regular stitch length and we're going to sew along this entire bottom using our regular 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so for this one I'm going to change to my zip foot because that is a little bit close for my walking foot to handle. Now, I use an adjustable zip / piping foot, which means that you can get really, really close to that zip teeth as you're sewing. I'm just going to take my walking foot off, and this one is I'm using the Janome HD9, which was gifted to me by Janome to use for bag making, and I absolutely love it. I could not recommend it more, which I know a lot of you have this machine as well, so if you don't have the adjustable zip / piping foot, that's the one foot I would say to get. You don't really need the walk-in foot. I just like to have it because it stabilises the fabric a little bit more as you're sewing. Okay, so now I'm going to sew along this entire edge here, and I'll swap back to my usual stitch length, and I'm lining up the edge of my fabric with the 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre mark on my needle plate, and I'm going to back stitch at the start and the end, and I might even back stitch a little bit where that zip starts and where that zip ends, just for extra reinforcement. There, you can take that clip out and just hold it out of the way. Okay. So that's our zip sandwiched in between our lining bottom and our interior top. So now we can press that and swap back to the ironing board. Sorry, just getting the right camera. Okay. We're just going to press these seam allowances towards the interior top. Okay. Now there is a reason for this, and I'll tell you when we come to do our top stitching now. What that reason is, because you might like to change it, and that's okay. That's a good thing about bag making. So now we're going to top stitch on the interior top 3/8 of an inch away from this teeth. Now the reason for pressing your seam allowances towards the interior top and top stitching into place is because when your zip is open, then the teeth will naturally hang down into the bag. If you did it the other way, with your seam allowances towards the lining, your zip teeth would naturally poke upwards towards the lining top or the interior top. Now personally, I think it looks better having them hanging down inside rather than poking it up. And also, I find that when you're using your bag, you don't want to accidentally catch on that all the time. You know, if you've got sore hands or delicate fingers like me, you don't want to be catching your hand on those teeth. So I like to press my seam allowances towards the interior top, and I do this on every pattern I make regardless of what it says. And then when you top stitch, the teeth will naturally hang down inside the bag. Okay, so I'm just going to top stitch along that interior top. Okay. So that's nicely top stitched, and then your zip does that lovely. Okay, so now we need the second interior top, and we're going to repeat the marks but reverse them. So on the first one we did 2 inches from the right and 1.5 from the left, and on this piece we're going to do 2 inches from the left and 1.5 inch from the right. So this is your left, so this is the one we're going to do at 2.5 inches. Sorry, 2 inches, not 1.5. Again, I use my chalk liner for this. And then 1.5 inches from this side. And this side with the 2 inch mark, we're also going to do a mark at 1 inch from the bottom. Right about there-ish. Okay. So now we're going to try and ignore this fabric and pretend that we're just using the zip. So we're going to pop our basting tape between those 2 marks again. Same as we did on the first one. And then we're going to pop our zip on. Okay, so in this situation, we're reversing them. So in this case, the open end of the zip is going this end. Now you can, if you want to, do your zip up, turn it around so it's facing me, and pop it into place. Now remember what we said about if you line up the edge of your teeth, then do that again so they're even. So just pressing that into place. Now before I sort of add clips and things, I'm just going to open that up and double check that my 2 ends line up here and my 2 marks line up there as well, and they do, so I'm happy with that. So now I'm going to just gently reach in and open that out again, and we can pretend about that bit of, or we can ignore that bit of fabric now. Just slightly off the edge there, so I'll just move that back. And again, pop a couple of clips in, hold it in place. Just while we're basting. In theory the tape should be enough, but I like to add a couple of clips on things that are going to have a bit of a stress point. Okay, and then we can lift the tape up to that 1 inch mark again and clip into place, and we'll baste along the bottom there. And because I've got my zip foot on, I'll just use my zip foot, although I prefer basting with my walking foot because I find the zip foot doesn't love layers so much. Even though the machine's strong enough, it you know, sometimes it protests pushing them through. I think I spoke too soon, it was fine. Okay, so I've just taken that clip out so I can do this manually. Hold it in place. There we are at the end again. Okay, so again, ignoring this piece, if you want to, you could just double check that that is lined up. You could just, you know, double check and zip it up and just ensure that both of those line up perfectly. We need our second lining bottom now, and we're going to run some basting tape along the entire top of that edge. Okay. And then we can add this one right sides down. So we're, oh, I forgot to mark my centres. Let me just quickly do that. And then we can make sure it's all lined up nicely. And I took my clip out. Oh dear. Good job, I've got about another 70 pens in my drawer, isn't it? Okay, so trying to ignore this piece here. I'm going to match up my centres and just press that into place along this edge. And the same with this edge. Okay, now don't worry too much about these bits being twisted. Before we sew up the sides, we'll check that they're not twisted. Okay, so this time we're going to start from this end and we're going to sew along using our 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And this one we could actually use our walking foot on, but I'll be a little bit lazy and use my zip foot. Okay, so we're starting at the closed end of the zip this time. And regular stitch length and 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. No problem with the layers actually. Okay, so now again we're going to do exactly the same. We're just going to press these seam allowances towards the interior top and then we can top stitch them into place. So there we go. Now this is when you can get rid of your chalk marks as well. Nice bit of steam helps with that. Push that to one side, out of the way. And I'll just press these seam allowances here. Now under this zip end, under this close end, you'll see that this seam is sewn really nicely. So you don't have to worry about that being open. That closed in the last seam that we sewed. Okay, so now we need to top stitch again along this way. Just get rid of these chalk marks. And we're going to top stitch along the entire width of that again. Oh, I found my pen. There we go. Okay. There we go. Right. Lovely. Okay. So now we can do up the zip and double check that everything is okay. And if you've twisted your zip, this is when you correct it. You just make sure that it's zipped up and then it won't be twisted anymore. So even if you've twisted it during sewing, once you come to zip it up, that will become apparent and you can just untwist it. Untwist it and do your zip up. Now I'm going to add a little dab of fray check to the end of my zip here. In fact, I'm going to trim the ends off. Just this bit of zip tape that's fraying slightly, and add a little dab of fray check to stop it fraying even further. And I'll get my zip end out. If you haven't got a zip end, you could always use a little square of faux leather or something just to cover the end of the zip. Okay, so that's what you'll see inside the bag when you go to open it. And you get a bit of a feel for how it's going to look now. I like that. Okay, so we need one zip end. I buy mine in bulk from Emmeline Bags, hence them all being stuck in plastic bags. And we need one screw, although I've just remembered that my screwdrivers are not actually in the studio at the moment, so I'll have to go and get those. And we need some glue. I'll just leave that upside down for a minute. Now, to fit this zip into this zip end, what I like to do is I like to fold one end underneath, so fold one side of zip tape underneath, and then fold the other zip tape in half, and then again underneath, and that makes that whole end the same width as the zip teeth, which will then fit really nicely inside your zip end, in theory. Okay, so you can just double check that that fits nicely before gluing. And hang on, I think I've come a bit unfolded there, so I'll fold that up again, and I'm going to use my long clip just to hold that in place for the moment. And then add a dab of glue into this, far into that zip end as you can. Okay. I'm using Beacon's Fabri-Tac, but you can use E6000 or Gutermann glue, whatever you've got. Right, so now there's a good dab of glue in there. And we can unclip that and just double check that that's all still good. Trim the end off. I don't know how they fray so easily. And then give that a good shove into the zip end as far as you can. And just double check that both sides are fairly equal coming out of the zip end as best you can. And because that's got glue in it, we could leave it just like that. Or you can add the screw, which you should do. So I'm going to add the screw. I'm just going to pause you, run and get my screwdrivers. I'll be back in a sec. Okay. Right, so I've got my screwdrivers. And I like to always put the colour of the screwdriver that I've used in my pattern picture so that I remember, because I'm terrible for remembering what colour or what size I need. So this one's magnetic, so I'm just going to insert the screw on the end screwdriver. Oh, and then it falls out. I think I need to magnetise these again maybe. Okay, or I'll just put the screw in the little screw hole and then I'll put the screwdriver on. There you go. And these are self-piercing screws, so you should be able to get them all the way through your zip tape. In we go. Okay, so that's the zip end attached to the bottom of our zip. Nice and neat, and that should stop us pulling the end of the zip pull off the end of the tape. Right, so we are nearly finished now with our lining, and you can see how it's going to look. It looks great. So I'm going to open my zip to about halfway and then match up these edges. So I'm going to match up the bottom and the corner cutouts and these top edges, but when you're matching together, favour these side seams. So a little bit of slight wonkiness there. Just going to trim that to match. So match up these side seams where the lining meets the interior top, and favour those over favouring anything else, because you can always trim everything else to match later. Okay, so I'm going to do the side seam and then I'm going to turn it round, and I think I'm probably going to leave this zip end out so that I can see where it is. I don't have to worry about hitting it accidentally while I'm sewing. Or you could even just clip that into the top. I'll do that. Okay, so again, match these two joins here where the interior top matches the lining bottom, and from there you can match up the side seams. Okay. And then you can match up the bottom, you can match the centres and just clip them together. They should match. Now when we sew, we're going to sew along the side edges and along the bottom, but not the corner cutouts. You can leave those open. And you're going to sew using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance from the top, and then after a little while, maybe an inch, taper to a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And the same on this side, so start at 3/8 of an inch and finish at 1/2 an inch, and then sew the bottom seam using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And I'm going to swap back to my regular walking foot. Done with zips now. In fact, yeah, both of the zips are in that lining, aren't they? So we're done with zips. It's all fun, fun, fun from here on in. Okay, I'll pop my walking foot back on. Right, okay, so we're using our regular stitch length. Okay, so at this corner, finish and cut your thread, or you can pull it out long and just trim it afterwards, and then we'll sew along the bottom. Now remember, you don't need to leave a turning gap in the bottom of the lining because we've left it in the zip pocket. So it's there ready for us. Okay, so we're just making sure that that zip top, the top zip, sorry, is pulled out of the way. Now we need to turn this 2D lining into a 3D lining. So you can open your zip again if you want, as long as your pocket zip is open and your top zip is at least half open will be good. Right, actually let's press these seam allowances open first. Right, go over to the ironing board and just fold them back and press into place, and then fold the other side back, so turn it over, fold the other side back and press into place. That's the barcode from my spool of sewing thread, I think. we'll do the same on the sides as best you can. And they're a little bit thicker on this top seam, aren't they? It will help to reduce bulk, and it will make it much easier to do your final stitching if you've pressed these seam allowances back. It gives a really nice finish at the end. Now if you find it's getting a little bit warm on your fingers, you can blow the steam away from your fingers as you're pressing. Okay. There we go, so press that side seam allowance open. So we've got one left to do. Just wanted to show you, it's not very easy, I know, to see dark fabrics against my dark ironing board. Okay, and the last edge. This side is a little bit trickier because you've got the zip there. You can use your fingers to just finger press them back and hold them in place until you press. Okay. Just caught that seam allowance there, so I'll just press that again. Make sure it's definitely right in place. Okay. Okay, so now we can open these box corners out. So you can put your fingers inside, or you can put your hands inside the bag. And what we're doing, we're opening the, or we're bringing the side seam to meet the bottom seam. We're matching these seams. So we're matching the side seam to the bottom seam and making sure that they match up perfectly there. If they don't, match them up as best you can, and we'll trim later. Sometimes it's a bit hard to get it cut out fully, accurately, or seam allowances go slightly awry, or you know, sometimes sewing in this interior top, you know, it changes things. It's okay. There's no judgment here. Okay, so that's what we've done with that open corner, and we'll do the same with this one. So we bring side seam to meet the bottom seam. And add a clip. I'll try and do this a bit lower so that you can see. And then just smooth these seam allowances open. Smooth these corners so that you can bring the raw edges together. Now if it seems like it's not quite sitting neatly, you can always do the two side bits and then come back to redo that middle bit. And you can always put your hand inside the bag and just smooth this angled crease there from inside with your fingers. Okay, now we're going to sew along these bottom corners using our regular stitch length, and I believe we're using the regular seam allowance, but I better check. Yes, we are. Okay, and try and keep these seam allowances open. It just gives you a neater finish. You can always just double check inside that that is lined up perfectly before you go on and do the second one. Yep, that's fine. Let's do the second one. And then that's it for the lining. And nearly, well, the bag will come together quickly after this. So that's it, that's our lining finished. So we've sewn our boxed corners and we've got our pockets, and we've got our top zip all done and ready. Now you'll notice that the zip pocket does extend underneath the bag. This is to give you as much space as possible to turn the bag through. Okay, but if you just give it a little finger press, a little manipulation into place, then that will naturally sit down under the base there, and that's only the seam allowances, so your pocket will actually finish where the bottom of the bag is. Okay, right, leave those zips open. Don't be tempted to fiddle with them like me. Okay, so leave those zips open and we'll start on the exterior now. So next we're going to sew our handles. You should have 2 handle pieces out of the same fabric as your base. So this is the contrast fabric. Now to sew these, we're going to fold each one in half lengthwise and press into place. In fact, I'll do this on the ironing board, and then we can see what we're doing. Okay, so fold each one in half lengthwise and give it a little press. Do the other one while that cools down so we don't burn our fingers. And then I'll go back to the first one now that that's cooled down, and then we're going to fold into the centre again, just like a regular 4-fold strap. Turn it the other way around and fold the other edge into the centre and press again. And then fold it all in half and give it a press along the original edge. Okay, that's one, and I'll finish the other one. Open it out, fold it to the centre and give it a press. So we've folded both our handles in half. Now we're going to sew along each long edge using a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. We're going to use our regular stitch length for this, and there's no need to back stitch at the start and the end. I like to do both at the same time. So I've done one, I've left my needle in, lifted my foot, put the other one under, and I'll just keep sewing straight onto it. And then I can bring the first one back round. This is really helpful if your machine doesn't like thick layers and your strap is thick. You can use it as a a leader piece almost. it, just give them a little twist back. Okay, now we need to mark directly in the centre, and I'm going to use my Chaco pen. This time I'm going to use my grey one, I think, so we can see it a little bit easier. Okay, so for the centre, I'll just fold it in half, make sure that that's accurate. And it helps that I've got little stripes on my fabric. It especially helps that my centre was exactly on a stripe, exactly on a line, so that's great. Right, okay, so we've marked in the centre, and then we need to mark as well 1.5 inches either side of that centre mark. Okay, so these marks will be visible, so remember to use something that you can definitely remove afterwards. Nothing like a friction pen, which might come back in the winter. Okay, so I've got a 3-inch section marked on each of these. I've got the centre and 1.5 inches each side. So now we're going to fold these in half, matching these marks, and we're going to sew between this mark and this mark. So I'm going to, actually if I do it that way we won't be able to see where we're sewing, will I? I'm going to fold it this way, and I'm going to match centre mark to centre mark when I clip. That's marked those two centres, and then I'm going to match this mark this side to the mark on the other side and pop a little clip in there. Now as you're doing this, you can use your finger just to smooth down inside, or if you've got a pen with nibbing, you can sort of smooth down the fabric inside and just make it really nice and a nice fold there. This will form like a bit of a faux rolled handle section. Just makes it really nice to grab, and these handles are grab handles, so you want it to be comfortable in your hand. So now we're going to sew between this line and this line using the same 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, okay, so that you're sewing directly on the seam that you've already got. Now I might add an extra little clip just in here if I can, and that should hold it in place while I move this one out of the way to get it under the foot. Okay. Oh, I don't think that worked too well. I think my clip is caught under my foot. It was a nice idea. Okay. So just slide this under without losing that fold, and then you can just manipulate it into place so that your needle can start right on that first line. And back stitch a couple of times. And we're sewing to that second mark. Okay, remember to make that neat because that will be seen. Okay, so we've created like a little rolled handle section there, and you can press down on it just to squish it into a rounder shape. Let's trim the thread there. Now this area is not going to be under any stress really. This is not a load bearing area, so you don't need to, but if you want to you can add a dab of fray check either end of that stitching line. And that's one of our little grab handles created. So I'll do the same on the second one. so now we need one of our exterior panels. And I'll start with the pieced panel. Now we need to make some marks on here. We need to make a mark, oh sorry, we need to make some marks on here actually, on the handle first. So we need to make a mark at 1 3/8 of an inch from the end. Now this is going to be seen possibly if you're not very accurate with your stitching. So if you're not confident with your stitching, make sure it's something that can be removed easily. And we're doing that for both of these handles. Okay, and we're only doing it on one end. Okay, so these ends that have got the mark on, they're not going to be sewn in until the very end. Okay, and that's going to make it easier to sew the top edge of this bag. Okay, so now we need to mark 5/8 of an inch from the top corner of the exterior. In fact, I'm going to do that on both. 5/8 of an inch. I'll do it here as well. And then we know we've definitely got our markings. Okay. So now you need one of these handles. Oh, I've probably done that on the wrong side now, haven't I? No. Oh dear. Okay, you need one of the handles, the one with the end without the marking on, and you're going to place that against this mark that you've just made here in the top corner. So you've got a mark there 5/8 of an inch away, and you're going to place that against the mark, and it's going to be right sides down, and you're going to place it with an inch overhanging. Okay, now that seems like a lot, but it does give it a bit of extra strength. And it means that if you want to add rivets at a later date or after you've finished, you can. You've got that extra fabric in there. Right, so that's an inch overhang. And it's up against my 5/8 of an inch mark in the top corner. Now I'm going to baste that into place. And remember, I'm only basting one end of the handle. The other end's going to be free and loose until we're nearly finished. So I'm just going to whiz along there, my long stitch length. Okay. Now you don't need to worry about the other handle only being sewn in with a top stitch, because it's not a very big bag. It's not going to carry a lot of weight unless you're carrying ruck samples, in which case you may need to think of a different bag or add rivets at the end. Okay, so that's one of our panels with one of our handles sewn on. In the end it's going to look like that. Okay, and we'll do it for the other panel as well. This one's not quite so easy to see, so I'll use my white liner. And we need 5/8 of an inch here. You don't really need 5/8 of an inch here because you're going to do it on your, you're going to mark it on your lining, but just for the sake of completeness, I will do it. Okay, so that's the end with the mark. So the other end is the end I'm going to attach. And I'll line that up, and then again right sides down and overhang by an inch. And then baste that into place. There we go. So that's our handles attached as much as we need them to be at this moment. We can move on to our base now. So we can put our handles to one side, and we'll need our base, which is piece A, and that's been interfaced and stabilised, and we'll also need our bag base. Now this is actually cheap plastic chopping mats from the supermarket. So if you can't find bag base, or you want to save a little bit of money, this is a great cost-effective alternative. Now, what I like to do is, to make sure it's centred, I like to make marks in the centre, top and bottom, and side to side for both my base and my bag base. So I'm going to do that. So this is 4 inches wide. I'm going to mark at 2 inches on the ends. This is just a way of making sure that you've got it lined up in the centre. And 10.5, so that'll be 5 1/8. And that will be the centre there. Okay, that's the bag base ready. And this is, should probably double check just in case I've cut it a bit wonky, shouldn't I? 11.5 by 5. Okay. So we'll do 2.5. Will give us the centre on each edge, and 11.5. Oh my goodness, that's gonna be 5 3/4. And I am terrible at maths, so I'm hoping these are right. Okay, there we go. So now we can line up our bag base, our plastic bag base on our fabric bag base. Now the measurements for the plastic bag base are in the material requirements list. And we are going to need a hole punch, and just my regular ruler will be fine for this one. So I need to draw some lines to mark out where we're going to punch our holes. And we're going to punch the holes first on the base, and then we're going to transfer them to the fabric base. So they need to be 2 inches from each short edge. So I can draw a line at 2 inches and another line at 2 inches the other side. And then 1/2 inch from each long edge. Okay, and the metric is all in the pattern, so if you're working in metric, you can use those calculations. Okay, so now we can use our hole punch if you've got one. I'm going to use a slightly larger hole than I use for rivets, because we need to get our feet through. These are my feet. I've got Emmeline feet again. So just having a little look at the stalk or the prongs on my feet and seeing which size they'll fit through nicely. So I think they'll fit through the size, well, that's size 4.5, so maybe I should go down one to size 4. Let's have a look. Okay, so I'm going to punch a hole in each of these 4 marks through my plastic bag base. Just like to give it a little wiggle to make sure it's a nice, good hole. If you haven't got the wrist strength for this hole punch, you can always use a hammer and a hole punch, which is a great option. And you can sometimes be a little bit more accurate with those as well. Okay. Now if you're using grid canvas, you probably don't need to punch holes. Probably just put the prongs through the gaps, but if you're using this plastic cutting mat, hole punch is a great idea. Right, okay, I'm not convinced that that is my centre mark on my fabric. I'm just going to fold it in half and double check. Yes, it is. Okay. So now I can line this plastic bag base up with my marks, and I can just make sure that my centre marks are matching, and then draw through the holes on my plastic bag base to indicate where I'm going to cut holes on my fabric bag base. Okay, now it should be a lot easier to punch the holes for the fabric, and I'm going to go one smaller on my fabric, so I'm going to go 3.5 on my fabric because I don't want these to stretch too much and the feet to fall out. Okay, so I'm just punching my holes. There you go. Okay, so that should be all we need for the hole punch. Now, because these fabric ones are likely to stretch and fray, I'm going to dab a fray check onto each of these. Make sure that the hole doesn't grow and our feet fall out. And I'll just add a dab to the foam as well. I don't know if you need to add it to the foam, but I always like to. Okay, now we can put our plastic bag base to one side for now. We don't need that until the very, very end of our bag making. And then next we're going to get back our exterior panels. Just having a little tidy up, give myself a bit more space. Okay, so I'll do my pieced panel first. And we're going to match centres now, and I'll use my clips. So I need to mark a centre on that one. And fold it in half, mark the centre. And then matching it to the centre of my base. And just clip on the centres there. And then clip all the way along here. Now this is where my wonky cutting for the pieced panel is becoming apparent, so I'm just going to manipulate that to follow the line of my panel, and hopefully it won't be too noticeable at the end. Nobody will know apart from you. Okay, so now we're going to sew along this edge here using our regular stitch length again and our regular seam allowance. Oh, I'm sewing my lining out of the way. Okay, that's our base onto there. Now you could, if you wanted to, top stitch along that length of the base. One of my testers did that and it looked quite nice. If you wanted to, it's an option for you. So now we need the second exterior panel. Has that got the centre marked? No, because I didn't read the instruction at the start. I'm sure you did though, so I'm sure yours are already marked. Okay, so now I'm going to match the other side of the base with the pieced panel attached, and I'm going to match those centre marks to centre marks and sew along That's edge again. Same as I did before. Okay, so now we've got our exterior of our bag. So we've got our pieced panel, our other panel, a solid panel, which you might have two pieced panels, your choice, and the base in between. So now, ignoring these handles flooping around, which might be handy if I just pin that out of the way temporarily. And that one. And I'm going to match these panels then, so pull that base out of the way, and I'm going to match these side edge to side edge. So ignore this bottom for the minute, just match up that side edge. And on this side again, match side edge to side edge. Just match them up as best as you can. If your cutting's not particularly straight, that's fine. Not a bag that needs accuracy on this one. I should probably clip in the middle. Okay. And again, we're going to sew from the top here, back stitch at the start and the end, so all the way down with our regular seam allowance, and the same on the other side as well. Ignore this base altogether at the moment. Do the other side. Okay. Okay, so now we've got the sides and the base. We just need to do our box bottom. So on the base, we've got our centre mark from where we marked the feet. We're going to press open these seam allowances on the side as best we can, and then we're going to match that centre mark to this seam allowance to form our box corner. Okay, so I'm going to press open those seam allowances now as best we can. Okay, let me just swap you back to the ironing board. There we go. So if you've got a clapper, actually I have got a clapper, you just hunt in this cupboard for it. Oh, there's a very tight gap. Okay, there we go. How's that for forward thinking, or not? So you can pop this tailor's clapper inside, and I've got a long thin edge on the top of mine, so I can use that like a tiny little ironing board. And make sure if you're buying a tailor's clapper to get a hardwood one. Softwood ones don't cope very well with steam. Okay, we'll do the other side. This one was actually handmade by the husband of a fabric shop, Social Studio. She runs classes for some of my patterns, and when I found out that he handmade them, I was very impressed. What's going on here? I can't get that. Oh, hang on. Just need to be a bit rougher with it. There we go. Okay, so we'll open out this side seam, give that a little press. A bit of extra steam. Hitch it through a bit further. Just to get the bottom. Okay, so I've pressed those seam allowances open. I'll put my tailor's clipper down. And we'll come back to the front. I need to find a better place, I think, for this lining. So maybe underneath. Okay, so when I can't find it, you'll have to remind me, okay? Okay, so now we need to just box the base and match up that side seam with the centre mark. Okay, and do that first. Don't worry about anything else yet. Just do the centre. Now add a clip a little bit further along, and then with one hand inside, just manipulate that fabric into that corner crease so that it sits as flat as possible. Okay. Now this is going to mean that the box bottom is formed from part of the exterior and part of the base. Okay, so I'll show you how that looks underneath. Okay, so there is going to be a little bit of the exterior in that boxed corner. So we'll do the other side. Put my hands in and just manipulate this fabric into place. This is what stops you getting puckers in the corners. Just give that little smooth down and then clip. Okay, now we're going to sew along this boxed corner, and I find it's easiest to sew with the bottom on top. So again, smooth that down so that this is all sitting nice and flat inside, and you're going to sew along that entire boxed corner. Okay, so I'm just going to smooth it again once I go over to the sewing machine. And use our regular 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm going to smooth this side now that it's in the sewing machine, just so I know that as I'm sewing it's not going to shift around. Try and keep my seam allowances open. Okay. And just smooth that again. All the way to the end. Okay. Now I'm just going to reach in and double check that my corner is okay without any puckers. I'll just have a quick peek. Yeah, that's fine, although there is a little loose thread there. If I show you this boxed corner, you can see here that the base is only in the middle. The boxed corner actually extends from the corner of the exterior there to the corner of the exterior there. Okay. And now we'll sew another little line just inside it, just to take the strain off of this corner. Okay, now we can do the second side exactly the same. So line up that centre with the seam allowance. Now this one might be a little bit trickier if you've done the angled pocket, depending on how accurate you were with your cutting and sewing. So just do it as best you can. Just manipulating that fabric so it lays flat, nice and flat. very difficult to show you this while I'm doing it, so please accept my apologies. Okay. Right, now this one, you've got the corner, or the, the piecing coming into this corner here. So if you wish to, you might want to sew with the bottom on top. I can't remember which way is easier. Let's sew with the bottom on top and then we'll be able to find out, won't we? Okay, so again, starting from that corner. And just manipulating it. Do you know, I think it's easy with the bottom on top. Sorry, bottom on bottom. It's a bit harder to sew this way. Okay, so let's just double check I haven't got any puckers in there and that it looks all okay, nice and smooth. A loose thread again. I'm very good at getting loose threads in my seams here, aren't I? Okay, so that's fine. So I'll do the second line of stitching on that one. This time I'm going to sew it with the bottom down. I think that's the key there. Let's do that with the bottom down. Right, so that's our exterior for the bag done. And you can turn it right sides out and get a look for how it looks then. So I probably need my grey liner back. So now we're going to turn the exterior right sides out and we're going to do this final stitching and finish our bag. Oh, another loose thread. Please tell me I'm not the only one who keeps finding loose threads in seams. Okay, I'll just turn this out. Now this base will sit nice and firm once you put the plastic bag base in. Okay. So that's how our bag looks at the moment. I think it looks pretty good. You can see on the base there that there's like a little border of the exterior all the way around this base piece. Okay, there we go. Right, so now we are ready to just finish the last bit of sewing. See if I turn it around there, you can maybe see it a bit better. And we'll need our lining piece. Right, let's finish this bag then. So we'll need our finished outer, our finished exterior, and our finished lining pieces. Okay, so first you need to decide which side is going to be your front and which side is going to be your back. So if this is your front, then just bear that in mind when you put it inside the lining. Okay, so this is going to be my front, and I like to have my zip opening from left to right. So let me zip this up and then you can see what I mean. So work out from your finished lining which section you want to be the front and which the back. So I want the zip pocket on the back and I want the pieced bit on the front. So double checking both of my zips are open, and then I'm going to pop the exterior inside the lining. Okay, and I'm going to match together, right sides together, which side I want to be on the front. So this I want to be on the front and this side I want to be on the front. So I'm going to put the bag exterior inside the lining, matching the front side to the front. Now this is going to be a squash. Okay, and whilst it's easier turning it the other way around, you get fewer creases if you do it this way. So if you're struggling to fit it inside, then by all means turn it the other way around with the lining right sides out and put it inside the exterior. But this will give you a much neater finish. Okay, so now we're going to clip around the top to hold everything in place, and we're going to sew around the top after this. So I'm matching my side seams and clipping. Just give it a really good squish down inside to get that in. Make sure your handles are tucked in nicely. You can match up the points as well. And if you've marked your centres along the top edges of these interior tops and your exterior panels, then you can match those as well. So just ease it into the curve there. You can stretch it slightly as you're sewing it into place to manipulate it. Don't worry too much. Okay, all the way around. Now on these corners where we haven't got a handle, so on this side we've got the handle sticking out there and we can sew that as normal. On this side where we don't have the handle, we're going to make some marks. We're going to leave a section open, unsewn, to slot the handle through later. Just pop another clip in there. So we're going to make marks at 1/2 inch and 2 inches. Let me see if I can lay this down a little bit easier. Tricky doing things backwards sometimes. Okay. So if you can see, just added my marks there. And I'm going to pop a clip back in that spot, although I'm not going to sew over it. And if you're prone to sewing over things, you could maybe also put, you know, a pin in there or something as a marker. When you come to it and it's different, you think, oh, hang on a second, I'm supposed to have done something different there. Okay, and the same on the other side. Just smooth that out a little bit more. So same again, 1/2 inch and 2 inches. That will remind me to leave those open. Pop the pin in. You can never have too many reminders, eh? Okay, so now we're going to sew around the entire top of the bag. And if you're like me and you haven't got a free arm, then I like to sew inside the bag. So that means that I'm going to put the bag like this on my sewing machine, and I'm going to have my presser foot inside here, and I'm going to sew along and then pull the bag round. So it might be a little bit trickier for you to see. I'm going to try and move my machine slightly to make it a bit easier. And I'm going to start here. It doesn't really matter where you start. If you're not sure that you can be consistent with your seam allowance, then you might possibly want to draw on the seam allowance around the curves before you get started. Okay, and I'm using my regular seam stitch length and 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So we're going to whiz around the entire top, leaving those gaps open. I should have said, sorry, so when you come to these markers, back stitch and stop sewing, and then lift your needle and start sewing again at the other side and back stitch again there before you start. So I've come to one of those parts there. Now I wonder whether we basted together. No. So I'll just stop sewing there and move on to the next marker. Now it's handy me having these pins in because I made my marks on the lining side and I'm sewing on the exterior side. You'll only get a couple of stitches in there really before you turn the corner. Just pull the excess of the bag, pull the bulk of the bag out of the way as you're sewing this. I'm trying to make it so that you can see, but it does look a bit awkward. If you need to readjust, just leave your needle down and lift your presser foot and move around. Okay. Pull those pins out before I stab myself with those. Come around to the second opening now. Okay, so again lift and start again at the second mark. Just manipulate the bag however you need to. Obviously, if you've got a free arm, this will be a lot easier for you. Okay, so we're nearly back to the beginning again. Okay, lovely. Okay. Move my machine back out the way. Okay. So we're just going to double check that we haven't got any puckers around the top there. No, it looks fine. Okay. And now we need some pinking shears. Oh, hang on. Missed a bit there. Okay. So I'm just going to go back and unpick that and correct it, and then I'll come back to you. Wouldn't it be lovely if every correction was that quick? Right, so all I've done is I've unpicked that section and pulled the fabric up until it meets. That was a quick solution. Now, going to add a dab of fray check on each corner here. And this is just going to ensure that the corners don't come unravelled when we're turning out. We've got a gap quite close to the corners here. It's better to be safe than sorry. Okay. Right, so now we're going to clip these corners. So don't cut your strap ends and just trim off that point there as close as you can, And if you want to clip a little bit further into the seam, you can. And again here, now that's the one with the gap, so I've just taken it close to the gap, but not quite touching. Clip the corner, and again for this corner. Okay. Now we're going to trim the curves with our pinking shears. If you haven't got pinking shears, you can just use scissors and just make little notches into these curves. Pinking shears are definitely the lazier option, or the more efficient option, shall we say. They're always my choice when it comes to clipping curves. Now I've got the rest of the gap there, so I've just clipped up to that gap. So the gap is as it was originally with the seam allowance. And I'll do this side as well. This will just help to relieve the tension on this top seam. So when you turn it out and do your press and your final top stitch, you won't get puckers along that top. Now I like to also snip into this curve if you can. If you're not feeling very brave, then don't panic too much about it. But it will help it sit a little bit neater at the end. I always like to say all of my secrets are hidden within my seam allowances, and this is one of those secrets. How much I've trimmed away or clipped or notched. Okay, so I've just trimmed into that with my pinking shears, and I'll do the same this side as well. Shame you're all so far away. We could have had a lovely big sewing day, couldn't we, if we were all local to each other, but I think that might take some doing with everybody. Okay, right, so I've clipped and trimmed all of these seams. I'm just going to have a quick look around my lining and see if there's anything that needs trimming or sorting, or anything that's not quite right, but it looks good to me. So now we're going to open that turning gap. So do you remember earlier we left the turning gap in the bottom here of the zip pocket, but we basted it closed. So now I'm going to steam press those stitches, and then we're going to use a seam ripper to open them. So let me get back to the ironing board. Okay. Steam press these stitches on the bottom. And you might have steamed them earlier, but it's okay to steam them again. Okay, we'll go back to the front, and now we can unpick these basting stitches. So just unpick between the back stitches on the bottom of this zip pocket. My iron's being particularly noisy. I don't know if you can hear it. Sounds like a little steam train. Okay. That turning gap is open. Ready. And just trim the extra threads from there. Make sure it's nice and neat. Remember, these little bits, this will determine the finish you get at the end. Okay, so now we can reach through that gap, and this is where you realise you've left your zip pocket done up still, except I haven't, because I remembered to leave it open, fortunately. And you can pull the whole bag through, and it should fit through quite nicely. It's a nice big gap for this size bag, and we haven't put the base in yet, so it's nice and pliable. Okay. So as we're turning it out, remember to push out those bottom corners and just manipulate the seams into the right place. Now these top corners, this is where we need, again, my little crochet hook that I use. And I'm going to reach through this gap in the pocket, and the end that's already sewn is great because you can just give a little tug on the handle and that end comes popping right out, and you can just use the crochet hook to poke the corner out. And you might want to, as soon as you've got that corner out, clip it into place so you know that that one's in place at least, and you can unclip your handles now. And then this second corner is a little bit more tricky because we've got the turning gap, but we've also got the corner, remember? So we want to try and manipulate the corner out, but not too much of the turning gap, not too much of the gap. So now we can fold the seam allowance of that gap inside and just give it a little clip for the minute. We'll give it a press. Sometimes I think when you're doing your first initial turnout, it's good to clip it, and then at least it's getting used to the idea of sitting nice and flat. Okay, and then for this side seam, what I like to do is put my hand inside and make sure those seam allowances are still both opened out, and then fold the top of the bag so that the lining is inside, or the interior top is inside, and clip them into place. There we go. Okay, so then this top corner, we'll unpin the strap on this side and give that little tug. Or another thread, how do they come to be in the seams like that? Okay. And again, I'll just reach through the zip pocket, my crochet hook, and give that little poke. And don't poke too hard because you don't want to come through the corner, but we've fray checked it, and we should be okay. And just finger roll this, manipulate it into place, and then we've just got our final corner to pull out. And don't try and rush this. I know it's a bit long-winded, but you know, if you're getting tired from this bag, give it a little break and then come back to it. You don't want to rush these last few steps. Just give that a little clip, and I can fold the seam allowances in on this top corner. And clip that into place, and then just finger roll this front. And I've got the lining mostly pushed inside the bag, but not really, because I keep reaching through the hole in the zip pocket. That's okay. And then this final side seam, with another loose thread again, so just reach inside and double check that that seam allowance is still open and that seam allowance is still open, and then you can fold that over, and that will give you a much easier sort of bulky bit to deal with when you come to do your final top stitching. Then if you're finding it too hard to sew through that bit, you could always now I suppose last resort is give it a hammer with a rubber mallet, but it's an option, it's a good option, or you could top stitch between those bulky bits and pop a little rivet into there. But if you have reduced all of the bulk and you haven't used fabric that's too thick, you should be okay. Right, so we'll tuck the zip back in, and now I'm going to tuck the lining into place just to hold it where it all should be while we're doing our final top stitch. And this is usually the part where I forget to close my turning gap, but we've still got the base to put in, so I've still got time. I'm not too late yet. Okay, so that fits really nicely in there, that's good. Just use my hand to press that down into place. And now we're going to give it a steam press all around the top, all around these top edges, and then we're going to slot the handles in and give it a top stitch to finish. Not to finish, we've got to put the base in. Oh dear. Okay, so I'll get my tailor's clapper again. Now if you've got a tiny ironing board, that would also work well. Let's see, oh I have got one actually. Let's use one of those instead. Probably work a bit better for me. Let's change you back to the ironing board. Okay, so I'll use my tiny ironing board. Please ignore the cover. Could do with a nice custom cover on it. Okay. So here, as you know, we've clipped all the way along, and normally I wouldn't clip until after I'd pressed, but I just want this to have a really nice finish. So I've clipped it, and then I'm going to take out a couple of clips at a time and give it a good press along the top seam. And then I can add the clips back on again to hold it in place. Okay. And we'll pull the handle out of the way. I haven't forgotten about the handle. We will finish that. Let's give it an extra steam. Just manipulate this bag how best you can. And again, a good shot of steam goes a long way here in this bag. Okay. Oh, I'm not inside the bag. That's what I'm struggling a little bit. So pop your tiny sleeve board inside the bag and then squash the bag down flat to get onto it if you've got one of these little boards, not a block of wood or a tailor's clapper or a towel or something, or an oven glove. Heat-proof oven glove is great doing these top edges. It sounds silly, a heat-proof oven glove. I would imagine that a not heat-proof oven glove is pretty much useless. It sounded good at the time though. Right. Okay, so we'll do this second opening. Okay, and if you can just sort of roll that inside, that interior top, you'll have another opportunity to do that when you're doing the final top stitch. You can manipulate that fabric into place. Okay. Very pleased with this one. It's quite calm colours. Looks nice. It'll be perfect once it's finished. Okay, and the second corner, just get your sleeve board into the bag and squish it down. Don't be afraid to show this bag who's boss. If you've got a cat, the cat is probably the boss. Or a small child. Small child is probably the boss. But in this case, you are the boss of the bag. Okay, so we might be all the way back round again. Yes, we are. Okay, great. So now we can switch back to front view. Let's see, double check I haven't forgotten anything. Turn it through, giving it a press. Okay, great. So now in these gaps, these top gaps, we can insert our handle. And remember, we drew this line on the end of the handle. Now making sure your handle's not twisted, which is not long enough to twist really. We're going to be inserting that into the gap. We'll try and do this on camera. It's a little bit far away, isn't it? Now we are inserting it all the way up to that line. Okay, need one of my big clips for this. Okay, so I've just inserted that handle into the gap all the way up to the line. And I can pop my regular clip back on. And that will just hold it in place while we top stitch. I'll do the same on this side. See if I can do it a little bit further away from myself so you can see. So into the gap, up to the line. Pop another clip on there. Okay. Oh, there we go. Right. Let's just double check. The mark on the handle matches the edge of the top folded edge. Yeah, great. Okay. Now there is an inch of handle inside the bag, don't forget. So if you want to add extra reinforcement, you can do a second line of top stitching, or you can add a rivet or two under the handle line. We were just trying to make this bag hardware light for this one, so that's why we haven't. So now we're going to top stitch around the entire top of the bag, and again, because I haven't got a free arm, I'm going to turn this bag inside out and sew from the inside. So because I'm sewing from the inside, if I turn it inside out, that means I'll be sewing on the exterior fabric, and I can make sure I've got a nice neat top stitch. So turn it inside out. I'm being cautious as though there's pins, but there aren't any pins, so that's okay. Now I like to start around here on the back edge and go all the way around the back edge first, because then by the time I've got to the front, in theory, all my wobbles are out. I say in theory. Move a little bit further over as well. Okay, so manipulate your bag however you need to get it flat where you're sewing. Well, let me bring it further over again. Okay. So however you need to have it, so that you can sew with the fabric nice and flat underneath. Take that extra clip out as well. That clip. Okay. Making rather a meal of this, I'm afraid. There we go. Okay. So I'm in place, ready to start. And personally, I'm going to back stitch at the start and the end, because my thread is not a particularly conspicuous colour. But if you have got thread that is going to show up and you want a really neat finish, don't forget the way that we did the, we left the threads long and we pulled them out. I'm wondering how better I can angle. I think that might be as good as it's getting, I'm afraid. Okay. Right, so we're using our regular top stitching length, whatever that is. If you prefer to use slightly longer, you can. I'm not going to use too long because I want to be sure that my handles are held in securely. Okay, so just pull the bag around. so now I'm going on to the front section of the bag, and I haven't done any wobbles yet, so we're okay. Move these extra clips out of the way. Now I recommend, if you need to remove clips, slow to a stop with your needle down, remove the clips, and then keep sewing. Don't try and adjust your hand position and remove clips and keep sewing at the same time, because that's when you get wobbles. Back to the original start now, so just taking my time. Okay. I always take a little bit longer top stitching, because I think it's the one thing that really shows up if you haven't done a brilliant top stitch. Although to be fair, it's probably only me who ever notices my wonky top stitching, because I definitely never see anybody else doing any wonky top stitching, so I suspect probably my own worst critic. Right, okay, so now that's done, we can turn the bag right sides out. Yours should hopefully still be the right side out if you had a free arm. Okay. And I'm pushing all my corners out, and I'm going to get my plastic bag base. Do you remember this? And we need 4 feet. And if you've got any duct tape, then you can add it to the back of the prongs once they're inserted. That just helps them to not to wear through to the lining. Okay, so we're going to open the zip pocket again, and we're going to insert the base through that zip pocket. Remember, we've still got the turning gap there. Pop that in, or shove it in, as I seem to be doing. And just manipulate it into place. Now, if you're using plastic cutting mats, you'll know that they're a little bit grippy and sticky, aren't they? I guess from them being non-slip cutting mats. Just get that in as best you can. And then with one hand inside, you can pop the feet through the base and into through the plastic base, and then the hand inside, so while you're holding it outside, pushing it outside, hand inside can be opening up those prongs and securing that in place. And we'll do that for the other ones. Sometimes you need to just work by feel for this one. Okay, open that one up. Looks good. And we'll do the same for the last two. again, that last one. You can see that pulls that base really nice and taut, doesn't it? And that just stops your bag sagging once you put things in. Okay, so now that those are inserted, I'm going to pull my zip pocket out and close that turning gap before we do the final press. I have managed to gift bags with an open turning gap many a time, and I wouldn't be surprised if I'm not the only one. Right, so where we had that row of basting stitches, you should be able to fold along that stitch line. And you can give it a press if you'd like, or you can just finger press it. Now we're going to whiz along there with a top stitch, close top stitch. If you like hand sewing, you can always close that with a ladder stitch. Now we can tuck that into place, smooth everything out inside the bag. Okay. There we go. Now remember that will go right the way to the bottom, that zip pocket, so just smooth it into place, and you can close the zip now. Just use your hand inside the bag to manipulate that lining into place, push it right out into the corners. It should be a good close fitting lining. Oh, another loose thread, gosh. Okay, it should fit quite nice and snug in there, and that does need the final press. Now if you've got an oven glove, go and grab it. If not, grab a towel or something like that, and we're just going to put our hands inside the bag and steam press in a very careful and controlled and safe manner, because safety never takes a day off, especially for Bag of the Month Club. So I'm just going to nip and get my oven gloves, and I'll be back in a sec. Right, so I'll stay on this front camera in the hope that you can see a little bit better. So with your hand in your oven glove, if you live with somebody else, they might think you're a bit funny for doing this, but it will keep you safe. Pop your hand in the oven glove inside the bag, and then just grab your iron and give it a good, really good steam press. And this will protect your hand whilst ensuring that you keep the shape of the bag, because you're able to add a bit of pressure onto the sides there. Okay. If you need a bit of extra steam, you can. Now, if you feel any heat at all coming through to your hand, stop immediately. Lift the oven up. Lift the iron up. Right. Not using an oven to press our bags. That would be overkill. Oh dear. Okay. But that oven glove should hopefully be protecting your hand really nicely. And you can just do the base a little bit between the feet if you want to. Okay. My oven glove is rubberized, so it gets stuck on things quite easily, but there we go. So just get any last threads off, and you can just zip up the bag, and you can have your zip tail tucked down inside, or you can have it hanging out the end, your choice. That's your finished bag, ready for any adventures that you might be able to go on. I'm quite pleased with that, and I hope you're pleased with yours as well. Mine's got the pocket in the front there, perfect for phone, keys, travel pass, whatever you take with you. Thank you for sewing with me today. I'm really pleased with my Hope handbag, and I hope you are too. Can't wait to see what you make with the pattern, and I'd love to see. So if you could tag me at Sewing Patterns by Mrs H, or if you contact us via the website www.mrs-h.com, or find us on Facebook, we would love to see what you make.